And welcome back. Our first conversation this morning is with Dr. Harold Young. He is a professor as well as a former advisor for the People's Constitutional Commission. And as we mentioned earlier, the conversation we're about to embark upon has to do with Belize and the monarchy and all things that have to do with Belize's history where that is concerned. Good morning,
Good morning.
Dr. Young.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
It's a pleasure.
Honored to be here.
So this is a fairly broad topic, right?
Yes.
And there's so much that we want to get in a short space of time while we have you here.
Yes.
Okay, first of all, let's talk about your participation in the article that was published, because you provided historical context for the journalists who put the piece together. What was that like in terms of being able to enlighten him from our Belizean point of view?
Well, first of all, I'd say I'm not saying that I represented the entire Belizean view. I wouldn't be that presumptuous. But I've been around long enough to have a feel for Belizean history. And I was very enlightening and helpful for me to voice it to him. I've been involved in studying history and politics in Belize for a long time. And there is no doubt that we have a serious 42 years after independence, we have a serious colonial hangover. Colonialism around the world, not just Belize, but around the world, whichever European power it was a traumatic experience for people, whether it was indigenous people or peoples brought in as enslaved peoples. It was a traumatic experience. And the wounds take a while to heal, but they need to be healed. We have to do something to heal it. And I think that what we are experiencing now is this sort of, in political science they call it institutional, following institutions, right? You keep following what you're accustomed to, even though it's painful or it doesn't serve your purposes, right? You keep doing it because you're accustomed to it. And so I think that's part of what I try to communicate to him, that we are an independent country on, I don't want to say just on paper, we are an independent country, but our minds are still our mind, including my mind, I still have a colonial mentality.
You believe that colonialism still lingers in Belize?
Very much so.
Could you expand on that? Why do you believe so?
You want an explanation is that I was raised, first of all, let's talk about that, in a system where a lot of the history wasn't true. Let's start with that. A lot of things that we were taught in school that were in textbooks were not true about Belize, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing is that we are conditioned by, not just in Belize, but by the world, that first world countries are better, right? That what comes from abroad is better. And it doesn't mean that it's not good or it cannot be helpful to us, speaking about Belize. It just means that you don't swallow it wholeheartedly, right? You have to be able to understand the context in which it's coming. And so an example, just to get straight into some of the things I know you all want to talk about, an example would be the idea that if we were to remove the monarch as the head of state of Belize, the Belizean dollar would devalue. That's a myth. That's a myth. And that's the idea that the British are somehow backing our currency. That our dollar has been tied to the US dollar for around 50 years. I mean, most people, and you probably saw the adjustment just the other day, announcement by the banks that it's not going to be 2 to 1, So that's a myth. So we are there with these myths. And then the other myth, which is a very serious one, is that the monarch has power. I'm not talking about like power in Belize, that has power in the UK. And the monarch doesn't have any power. They have ceremonial roles to play, right? But the parliamentary supremacy in the UK is paramount. It's even more, their parliament is even more, I don't like the word more supreme, but has even more power than our parliament. because they do not have a judiciary. The judicial branch in the UK cannot review and declare something the parliament does as being unconstitutional, while ours can. So the parliament in the UK is unparalleled
Yeah.
in its supremacy.
Supreme authority.
Yeah. So the idea that the monarch has some sort of influence over decisions that the political branch of the UK government makes is a myth. But we hold on to that, right?
And what feeds into that myth? It's the idea that some people have that if we are to move away from the monarch and Guatemala strengthens its position, that all of a sudden that England will come and save Belize. And I keep telling people that's not necessarily the case.
Yeah.
That's not going to
I will go further. I agree with you totally, and I've heard that many, many times. But I'll go further than that.
Yeah.
I had somebody actually say that if we retain the monarch would like influence the government. Because my response was that any move the UK government does is a political decision by the parliament. And they were like, well, the monarch could influence them to do it. I'm like, no, the monarch cannot.
Yeah.
Doesn't have the authority they can't influence anybody. So they even think that the monarch can influence the political wing to do something like send troops to Belize, for example. And that's not real.
So let me ask you this. In terms of our past with slavery, our past with colonialism, and the fact that perhaps not only as a country, but as a region that was formerly colonized by England, when we bring up the idea of reparations, how do we now say that Belize, speaking for us as a country, would have anything to gain if we go down that road, considering the fact that the monarch and the UK Parliament are separate bodies, and we've just accepted that the monarch is ceremonial and the UK Parliament, for instance, has the supreme authority. How would such a conversation be had?
Well, first of all, reparation discussion is not with the monarch. The reparation discussion is with the UK government. They were the ones that made all the rules and laws about enslaving people.
Yeah.
They were the ones that made all the rules about merchants being able to come and exploit. I'm using the word merchant to mean any sort of business person.
Yeah.
Right? Queen Elizabeth I was the one that gave privateers, the buccaneers that we think are these wonderful people. They're the one that gave them the letters to go and pillage the Spanish realm, right? But it was also done by Parliament. Parliament was doing all this.
They backed it.
Yeah. So the idea of reparations has nothing directly to do with the monarch. Part of the discussion is that the monarch, as the head of state of the UK, should apologize.
Yeah.
They will never, let me put it this way, I don't think that they will ever use the word apologize. Because when you apologize for something, you are accepting culpability. Which would automatically mean you could go to court and say, they have accepted they did something wrong, we require some sort of compensation. So they will say it was a dark time in history, they will say it was unfortunate,
Yeah.
they would say,
They'll
but they will never,
other descriptives.
right. So that's the first thing. The other big thing is the idea of reparations that people think they're going to end up with $10,000 in their bank account. That's not what reparations means.
Yeah.
In the modern world, in our multi-connected world and the financial systems that we have, reparations means lots of things. That's a broad discussion that the government of Belize or any government in the region or in the world that is dealing with their colonial power has to deal with and do that. So there are lots of vehicles to deal with it. We have the UNDP, we have World Bank, we have IMF, we have lots of ways of multilateral agreements. We have lots of ways of dealing with what reparations mean, right? And I think, and even something like education, like opportunities for us to improve our education system with connections to universities that can provide resources to university. And I don't mean necessarily money, but expertise to help the universities. So things like that. Reparations is a very broad term.
Yeah.
And we need to think about it in that way.
Yeah. I want to take things
Let
back.
me make one more point. One more
Yeah.
point. Also, keep in mind when you think about reparations that when slavery was it was abolished by the British Parliament, the slave owners were compensated for the loss of their property. Millions of pounds were paid. Right? Compare that to the United States, which had one of the bloodiest civil wars in the history of the world per capita, right? And there was nothing was paid to anybody, either way. But the British government actually passed and paid money to the slave owners.
We spoke about the myths of having that tie to the monarch and the fears that are associated with those myths if we should detach ourselves from them. I want to ask you to expand on what is the role then of the monarchy, of us being under the monarchy?
The role?
Or how do...
The Governor General on now King George III's, Charles III, sorry. George III was the one that was U.S. independence, I'm sorry. Charles III.
Mistake earlier.
Our Governor General on the monarch's behalf signs our laws.
And that's it?
I mean, pretty much. I mean, there's not.
It's all titular.
Yeah, it's just it's ceremonial. It's just titular. It doesn't have any
teeth in it.
Yeah. There has no teeth to it. If the governor, and I know there's an interesting question. This is an interesting question because it's a constitutional issue. If the Governor General decides not to sign a law, not to sign one of the acts of our Parliament, what you think would happen?
She would be replaced.
Yeah, they would just replace her or him.
Yeah.
They just replace.
But for all these years, the role of the Governor General has only been seen as a rubber stamp to whichever government
and
is in
that's
power.
exactly what it is. It has no real role. And think about it. Let's use some real examples because Guyana is the other mainland country in the British, what was the former British Caribbean, the British Commonwealth, and they have a territorial dispute with Venezuela. That's probably as long-standing as ours, and with oil involved now,
it's even more precarious.
Well, no, and they removed the monarchy in the 70s. And they,
I think it's a right time for us to have this conversation.
Absolutely.
Though, right? We're 42 years behind September 21st, 1981.
Yes.
Some would say we're still very much a young nation.
Yes.
But we're getting there in terms of being able to have certain national and open discussions where our history and our future is concerned.
Yes.
And I think because of that, we're at a critical juncture to have the conversation. There's one thing that has been brought to the fore as a result of this very same topic is the widening disconnect or the gap between the younger generation and the older generation where Belize's past and its history and of course where we are at present are concerned. Referring back to the article that I read, that piece with Brighton Codd is what sticks out.
Yes.
And I'm certain that he doesn't only speak for himself when he shared that position. He was speaking for a lot of young people who don't know what the Union Jack is in that context.
Or
don't know God Save the Queen. They don't.
I actually don't really know.
Well, neither do I. But I'm saying
no, I understand.
He speaks for a large portion of us in our society in terms of that.
I think that's really true. But I want to let's make a point about the generational thing, because I've had some of these intergenerational discussions as well. And bridging the gap, there will never be a perfect time to do anything. There will never be a kumbaya moment where everybody is on one accord. Everybody agrees, right? And this post-independence generation, let's say anybody who is 40 and younger, would not remember, and we probably are not, I know they're not taught, that leading up to independence, there was a serious division
Yeah.
within political parties. Belize there wasn't a kumbaya moment at independence. That was a brave, bold political step by the then ruling party, which the opposition would have no part of. Right?
Yeah.
So I actually spoke to somebody right here in Channel 5 last time, one of the times I was here, and the person said, we need to have a time like when everybody was together for independence. I'm like,
That never happened.
no, that never happened. That's a myth. I was there.
Yeah.
I
And we
was
were as divided as we ever were.
yes. But I'm not against. I'm not saying we need to have more education or more information. That's not. But the goal shouldn't. I don't think we should set a ridiculous goal like everybody must agree or be on the same page. Because that we'll never do anything. And so that goes back to one of the words I've been using a lot when it comes to this, is that we as a people, not necessarily everybody 100%, but we as a people collectively have to be brave. And we have examples where Belize has been brave. Belize was brave at independence. We've been brave enough to change governments, right? We've been brave enough to remove the Privy Council. So we've been brave enough to establish relations with Guatemala.
Brave
and
enough
allow
to
the
go to the
embassy.
ICJ.
We've been brave enough to go to the ICJ. Yeah, that's the last brave. So we can be brave.
Yeah.
And it doesn't require, as I said, a kumbaya moment where everybody is on the same thing. We can be brave, and we have to tighten our belts, girden our loins, hold on and look at these issues square in the face. And I think that's where we tend to be timid in between those acts of those moments of bravery. But we can be brave, and we need to be.
As we wrap up this particular conversation, I know we'll have you with us still for a transition into another part. But I want to ask you, with the challenges of the monarchy currently, do you believe that the monarchy is at risk of losing its relevance?
Well, the relevance of the monarchy to the UK is a matter for the British people. I have no penny in that dollar. Or I don't have a cent in that dollar. There's a colonial thing. I said penny. There's a colonial part of me right there. There it came right out, right? As opposed to cent. We haven't had pennies in, I don't know, in my lifetime.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, I don't have a cent in that dollar. Or I don't have a penny in that pound.
Yeah.
So that's really a matter for them. But think about this. That event, the coronation event, costed £100 million, which is 125 million US dollars, which is $250 million US dollars. But that's a matter for them.
Yeah.
And if and it could be, they could argue, or I could say that, because I've spoken to many people, not many, but I've spoken to some people, I've been to the UK a number of times, that it's a tourist attraction.
Really?
That's
right?
interesting, yeah.
It's a tourist attraction. But that's a matter for them,
Okay.
not for us.
All right. Well, we're going to move things on to our second topic that we have you here to discuss, and that is the Pantheon Fantastic 2023.
Yes.
Just to give us a little bit of a background, what exactly is the Pantheon Foundation?
The Pantheon Foundation, it's an art project. It's an art foundation that is designed to promote art in general in Belize, give a platform for artists. And this is our second year, and every year we have a different art form. So last year it was painting, and this year it was poetry and performance. And we had some wonderful entries, and we have some of the winners here to present the prizes for them. So the idea is to build a platform for artists and build additional stories for Belize, and additional art forms for Belize, additional art expressions for Belize, around the idea of the sleeping giant, which is a short story that I wrote, which I need to revise. Short story I wrote some years ago, which we can talk about more in the next segment. But the idea is that we are challenged as Belizeans to take care of Belize, to be good stewards of our country, and not just saving the jaguar, but stewards of ourselves, people, in conjunction with the environment, flora, fauna, ocean, everything. So that's the charge of the story.
Yeah. So just to touch a little bit on the fact that you decided to advocate for this through the art, why art?
You know, it has a lot to do with, I think it has a lot to do with my, the constraints in my upbringing. And I'm sure there are people there who can sympathize with that, where arts were considered not the thing. You either be a lawyer, a doctor, an engineer, and an accountant, or a public servant, right? And guess which one I ended up being, right? So I think, and then I realized later on that no, art is an expression of being human.
Do you believe that there is enough that's being done to foster a love of art from a very young age in our educational system? I say educational system because perhaps not all of it starts at home where that is concerned, right? But at least when you're in that institution where you're learning, they could begin to introduce certain concepts and nurture a love of either creative or expressive arts.
Well, from what I've seen, because I also have a children's book that I've gone around the country to give out. It's not as bad as it was as when I was in school. There's a lot more to be done, and I think these young people that you will meet today are demonstrations of the efforts that are being done. But it's never enough, I would say, right? But we are doing a lot better than we used to. And also, I think the patron for this year's event, Professor Ulbalamir Gera, can speak to that as somebody in the education system as well. But from what I can see, we are doing better. Can we do better? Yes. Are we doing better than when I was in school? Way better. Way better. But of course, it's, there's more. Let me just say one quick thing about why this was important to me. This light bulb went off in my head. I went to a museum, of course, a museum in the States, right? And I go into this modern museum, and in the corner there was a snow shovel. I know it was a snow shovel. It was a shovel to me, hanging in the corner, and it had a plaque with the artist's name. And I said, "That's a snow shovel. How is that art?" I could have hung that there. And the person I was with looked at me and said, "But did you?"
Yeah.
Did you do it? And I was like, "No." So that person did it. It's art. You don't have to like it. You don't have to love it.
Yeah.
It's subjective.
It's subjective. Yeah. So there's a little bit of artist in everybody. And I want to foster that.
Yeah.
The big thing about art is, and again, Professor Gera can talk about this, is the move from doing art and then making it public, where you share it for the public eye. That's the big step. Yeah. And he can talk a bit more about that because
that's almost like an intimate part of you.
Exactly.
It's your mind.
Exactly.
It's your passion. It's your heart.
You're giving out something. So and he can talk about his journey with that. For me, I did it a lot later, so I was a little more. I don't really care because I was older.
Yeah,
but for a younger person, a little more sure than I was earlier.
Yeah. All right, we're going to preview, though, the Pantheon Fantastic 2023.
Belize Pantheon.
The Belize Pantheon Fantastic 2023. We have a video preview that we will be sharing with you now.
Above the landscape, a giant sleeps, his skin shrouded in hills and trees. Above the horizon, his silhouette creeps, nestled by the Caribbean breeze. The subject of stories, this hulking mass, by people of the land as times have passed. Stories spun, crafted, weaved, and told. Stories ancient, antique, archaic, and old. They speak of a man who crafted the earth. Islands he moved and the fjords he birthed. He molded mountains, the world he roamed, and so he found Belize, where he would call home. A massive figure, framed by the clouds, a stalwart figure, persistent and proud, larger than life, laying beneath the sky, laying before we live, and laying after we die. A deluge of disaster shall plague the land. Earthquakes rumble, hurricanes rage. But throughout it all, the Colossus stands. Unfettered and unbothered, he sleeps through the age. We look at his body and we see something more. A slumbering behemoth inside a slumbering man wowing us all. For in the face of this titan, what else can you feel but small? And yet, regardless of his massive size, he's never ignored our plights and cries. Throughout all of our beautiful sun-kissed lands, the giant cradles them with gentle hands. And so the people will tell stories of a colossus tall, defiant. The people will tell stories of Belize's sleeping giant.
All right, we have with us the winners of the Pantheon Fantastic 2023. Hi, good morning, guys. Thank you so much for joining us. We have with us Celeste Garcia, and she's third place. She got bronze. We also have Nathan Sharp. He was first place with gold, and Ubaldemir Guerra, Pantheon Fantastic. Good morning, Patron. Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
Let's talk about the impact of this competition, first of all, on you guys as young artists.
Well, for me, it's kind of the first time that I've ever made one of my works public. I kind of do poetry on the side as a passion project, but I've never taken that step and kind of put it out to the world. So at least for me, it's been kind of a big step.
How did you get involved, or what inspired you to become a part of it?
At first, I was exposed by my English teacher actually at school, Miss Otley, and I read the story that was provided about Chakshango and the Giants, and what really encapsulated me was the idea of the people's relationship with this sleeping giant, you know, not just the story that is explicitly there, but the relationship that it had with the people and the legend that was played up. And so in my poem, I tried to lean into that and kind of show the relationship that the people had with the giant, because I remember going on road trips as a child. I remember going on class trips, and everyone point out the window and go, "Oh my God, it's a sleeping giant!" You know.
Yep.
And seeing
Part
that
of the
story.
Belizean experience.
Yeah, exactly. And seeing that as a story explicitly told, and my relationship with that story, I wanted to convey that with my poem. So, for me, it was kind of nostalgic to go back to those days and express how I felt, and talk about this larger-than-life giant, and actually putting that work out into the world was, yeah, it was cool.
And you,
Yes, sir.
Celeste?
Well, for me, what inspired me to sort of do it was also my English teacher at school, Mr. Gray. And the whole thing was basically about like the story, like this great giant Chakshango, and he's just doing all these amazing stuff. So I just really wanted to link my poem to that and everything. So yeah.
How do you guys feel about the exposure that you're getting? Because certain works can be held very close and dear to the author or the poet in this case. Having it being published or put out there in the open, how do you guys feel about that kind of exposure?
I mean, for me, my whole poem's kind of basis was that relationship of the people of Belize and their sleeping giant. So it's kind of a 50-50 in which anyone who puts out a work of passion is kind of nervous for criticism or nervous for reception. But it's also amazing for me to see my work about our people's relationship to this giant be received on such a large scale, and have people appreciate it and just have that same connection to the giant that I did. So
Let's switch over to Professor Guerra and your role with these young artists, as I could describe them as such. What has that been like, and how have you been able to, perhaps with your own experiences in this form, be able to guide them in their path?
Well, as a poet and as a lecturer, I have always wanted to connect with a younger audience out of my own curiosity to see, you know, what are high schoolers doing with the form? What are they doing with poetry and developing poetry? You know that in Belize, in the literary arts, you could say that poetry is one of the most developed in terms of the number of poets that have published works.
Yeah.
And I said, well, we need to see what these young people are doing with their poetry. And the way I got into this particular event as a patron is that I had worked in the previous year's competition as a judge on the panel, where fantastic works were produced, artworks, and we were brainstorming ideas for this year's competition. And you know, I said, well, I'm a poet, so naturally I suggested that, poetry would be a good one. But I was also in the process where I started over the recent years to get my own work published and also to perform works of poetry.
Yeah.
And I said, well, let's try to do this so that we could have a poem and a performance of the poem as part of the process, since I believe that students, young people, are very much in tune with technology that they can use to record themselves. Everybody has a phone,
Yeah.
a device that they can produce something creative with the devices that they have, right? So it was a wonderful experience working with these young people. And I'm glad I got this opportunity because it also has built my network with younger audiences and high school teachers and so on who have reached out to me to want to do different workshops and creative things that, that we can expand on. And that is something I'm certainly thrilled about.
Is poetry as an art form, and I'll put it to both of you guys, is poetry as an art form still alive in Belize, considering the fact that you have other forms of expression? People are into music, people are into other, like visual arts and so forth. Where is poetry's place in all of what is happening?
But I think poetry has been, up and down throughout the history of writing poetry. You have these moments where you have a lot of poetry coming out. But recently, there are certain groups who organize events and have poetry readings and slam competitions. During this competition, I was asked to host an event, not host, but to judge an event at Palote High School, where the young girls there participated in a poetry slam. So it might not be as loud and out there in the public as it should be, but there is much going on in that field, and there is still more that could be done to develop it further. For me, in my own experience, I wrote poems for about 20 years until I thought about getting it out there in the world.
Yeah.
Right? So there is that part of it too, because poetry is hard work. And people don't think about it like that when they see it on the page. It looks like, a little bit of words on a page lined up, and anybody can do it. But if you take it seriously, it takes a lot of discipline to get up, to invest an hour a day doing what you need to do to get that poem written and edited and drafted until you say, okay, this is what I want to express, right? So if you take it that seriously, it could take you some time before you feel that you can get it out there to have it published and or performed to an audience. And that was my experience. So I guess that plays into these ups and downs that we experience, because people are writing, but not necessarily ready to share, right?
I want to say something, and Dr. Gary can chime in. I want to say something about poetry. I think one of the things that we're challenged with is that we have this notion of poetry in a box. That it's how many lines and stanzas,
Yeah.
right?
Verses
The
and stuff like that,
formalities
yeah.
of it, and
The structure.
Structure. So we tend to be inhibited. But there's a whole world of freestyle writing that doesn't require you to any of that, and so
To conform to those
to conform to any of
structure,
those, and there are pros and cons. So rigid structures have a role in the sense that it forces your brain to focus and discipline into these structures, and if you can write in these structures something beautiful, then that's a talent. That's like something amazing. That's what all the traditional British, which we used to read Keats and all these people, right? They wrote in Wordsworth like that. So, but now we have this modern where you can free form, right? So for somebody who is thinking about, I cannot write a poem, if you are able to write, you can write down your thoughts. A song is a poem being sang, right?
Yeah.
So it crosses boundaries, and I think the idea of thinking about it in a broader way makes it more accessible. And one of the things that I want to do, and I hope we can talk about it for next year, is while schools, you asked me about how schools are doing. The schools are doing better than they were when I was in school, but I want to see some young people participate, and our age of young is 15 to 35.
Yeah.
Right? I want to see some young people participate who are not in the institutions.
Yeah.
Right? That may not have, that may be just at home writing it. Something, because it is therapeutic, and I don't mean to use like a big word like to make it sound like you're going to the doctor, but it is good for the mind to
Art
express
is
yourself.
therapeutic,
Yes,
though.
it is. It is good for the mind to express yourself. And so that's why this project has a different art form every year, so that you get tap into different groups of people, how they express themselves. So just writing in itself is therapeutic, and I think that that's part of us growing as a nation, decolonizing ourselves, and believing that what we think and what we write, what we speak, what we produce is of value. Right? Whether it's in Creole, whether it's in Garifuna, whatever language, most of us not talk standard English.
Yeah.
Most of we talk Creole. Right?
Yeah.
Most of us don't speak standard English. Our first language is Creole.
Yeah.
And we need to be proud of that and use that as part of our identity, not to take away from any other group. It should be part of the identity. But we have to have confidence. I was speaking about bravery earlier. We have to be brave enough. I'll give you one quick example. I have a friend, and he's going to kill me for saying it. I won't call his name, but he'll kill me. Used to always, like, I was always advocating for Creole, and he would say, oh, you know, but you can't do anything with Creole, and you always pushing this Creole thing, blah, 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 blah. Okay, I still do it. A few years afterwards, he came to me and said, you know, so-and-so, the person is from Canada, introduced him, and said he speaks 2 languages. He speaks Creole and English. And he's like, wow, I speak 2 languages. He was telling me as if this was news. And I'm like, I've been telling you this for years. You took somebody from outside to come in to validate that to you. We need to get past that and be brave about what we're doing.
Just to jump on that, in our own region, there are examples of taking the local language and making a subgenre of poetry out of it. Take dub poetry, for instance,
Yes.
and the wonderful works and expressions that have come out of that.
Yes.
You know, so we still have a lot of room where we can do something similar, where we can create our own subgenre. We have our own unique way of speaking and expressing ourselves, and poetry offers that form of language, expression, creativity, right? So. So there's a lot you can do in that regard with poetry.
Wonderfully.
Sorry, if I may quickly interject to your question. I think that programs exactly like the Belize Pantheon Fantastic are what kind of gives poetry a place in the modern day, because as Dr. Guerra said, with people's feeling of freedom to express and feeling of confidence to express their works, as in me, I've been doing poetry for years now, but this is the first time I've gotten it out. I feel like that's also a factor. Like, these programs helps students or young people or people who are just at home doing this as a passion project get their works out there. For me, at least, seeing the reception that my work has had, seeing the reception that last year's Belize Pantheon Fantastic, their artwork has had, seeing amazing works like the second place winners, seeing like Celeste's performance, all of these kind of contribute to that collective idea of this is what we want to do. This has value. And so other people will be inspired to put that out into Belize's kind of common culture. So I think that that's where poetry has its spot in the modern day.
Excellent. Guys, we are just about out of time, but we want to say thank you so much for joining us. Sorry? Oh, we are going to present the prizes to our winners just before we wrap things up. But of course, in the meantime, we want to say thank you guys so much for joining us. I can imagine we will be expecting even more work from you guys. And keep up the great work. Keep up the great work.
So
yes.
I'll just say the awards, because to encourage people, the first prize that Mr. Sharp won is $1,000, and $1,500. I'm sorry, $1,500, which he will get today. And the second place was a notepad and third place, Mr. Garcia will get a cell phone.
Oh, attractive prizes.
Yes.
And imagine just to do something that you love. Yeah. All right, perfect. We're going to take our first break, and when we come back, we're going to continue the conversation on mental health. We spoke about therapy, so we're going to take things on a little bit deeper into our second segment. We'll be joined by a mental health representative, and we'll be continuing the conversation on mental health. Don't go away.